Up next in the broadcast, the nation's longest railway strike ends with an agreement to form a parliamentary subcommittee to reform KORAIL and improve its services. Rival party leaders continue their tug-of-war over how much power to grant intelligence agents while holding hostage next year's budget. And Russia reels from 2 deadly suicide bombings in the span of 24 hours, which raises alarms over whether the 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics will be free from terrorist attacks. Primetime News begins now.
Good evening and welcome to Primetime News. It's Monday, December 30th here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I am Yoo Ji-hae.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thank you so much for joining us. We begin with the nation's longest ever railway strike, which has come to an end after lawmakers promised moves to prevent the privatization of rail services.
This will bring more than 8,000 workers who took part in the walkout back to work starting tomorrow morning. Our Kim Hyun-bin has more on the breakthrough.
After 22 days, striking KORAIL union workers have agreed to cross back across the picket lines and start back at work 11 a.m. Tuesday. Union leaders promised to call off the strike Monday after the country's 2 main political parties agreed to form a parliamentary subcommittee under the Transport Ministry.
We will be actively involved in the new subcommittee to guide it in the right direction, and we will share the process with the public to enhance our public railway system.
However, while the union leader urged union members to return to work, he also called on them to continue with the fight for where they work. The formation of the committee was one of the 5 changes the union asked for during talks with KORAIL last Thursday. Once formed, the committee will deal with issues related to improving the management of the nation's railways without privatizing railway services. KORAIL is currently in debt to the tune of $16 billion. With poor management blamed as a primary reason. The privatization issue has been the main point of contention for the union and precipitated the strike. They have maintained the government's plan to run a subsidiary to run a new bullet train line is actually the first step toward privatizing rail services in the future, something the government denies. The parliamentary committee will have an equal number of members from each of the 2 main rival parties, but will be headed by someone from the ruling Saenuri party. Meanwhile, despite the strike's end, police say they will continue to press charges against KORAIL union leaders. The police issued 6 more arrest warrants on Monday, bringing the total to 31. 2 union members are currently in police custody, while another is being questioned by the police. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
And for more on much anticipated breakthrough in the longest railway walkout in Korean history, we bring in Dr. Jung Geun, president of Asia Finance Society, who's also a former professor of economics at Korea University. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for inviting me here.
Well, Professor, we ended last week with the union threatening 2 weeks of rallies, but what do you make of their decision to end the strike, and does it necessarily mean that conflicts between labor and management have ended?
Actually, they have different approaches. The government want to increase competition in the railway system, but labor union have been afraid of the privatization. Therefore, I think at the National Assembly, there might be a subcommittee to discuss need of privatization. So I think in the future, yeah, that is actually the cornerstone of the end of the long-lasting strike.
So is stimulating the so-called yardstick competition a key solution to salvaging the debt-ridden public entity like KORAIL?
That's right, yeah. Most Korean public-owned companies or state-owned companies are monopolistic. Therefore, inefficiency and also the snowballing debt nowadays, which is a very big issue in Korea. Therefore, I think the big crucial point is how to increase the competition. Therefore, the government also want to establish a subsidiary in Korean railroad system. So in case of subsidiary, there must be some competition in the railway system. Therefore, finally, efficiency will be increased. That's a government ideal plan.
So there are many other state-run entities that are possibly going to go under some sort of reform. What can the government learn from this case when it goes for fixing some of these other organizations?
In case we have two fields to resolve the state-owned companies' problem. One is increasing competition. The second is privatization. But most labor unions of state-owned companies are afraid of privatization because, in case of privatization, if they will have some loss of in management, they must be restructured. But in case of state-owned companies, government sector must provide some subsidy to them. Therefore, they do not like to privatize. On the other hand, they can accept increasing competition. So I think there must be some compromise between government policy and labor unions' attitude.
Well, looking forward to year 2014, should we expect another year of labor turmoil?
I think now, very fortunately, the end of the strike because they have an agreement on establishment of a subcommittee to discuss railway issues. But I think main issues are whether privatization clause will be included or not. That's very big issue. But if the agreement will include non-privatization, that will be will be applied to another public state-owned companies issues in the future. Therefore, government cannot include a non-privatization clause in the agreement. But railway union want to include. That's why I think in the new year there might be another big trouble on that issues.
All right. Well, I guess we'll have to look for more negotiations ahead. Thank you so much
that's right,
for your insight tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, despite headway into the rail strike, progress wasn't too clear, however, on another tug-of-war.
With less than a day to go until we usher in a new year, Korea's rival parties scrambled to pass key pending bills, including the 2014 budget and spy agency reforms. Our Kim Hyun-ji explains.
The floor leaders of the rival parties, who have been holding closed-door marathon talks all Monday, have reportedly reached an agreement on the 2014 budget bill. After the budget bill gets the okay from the Special Parliamentary Budget Committee, it'll enter a full assembly session for a final vote. The rival parties also agreed to lower the bar for who pays the highest income tax rate of 38%. Currently, those who make more than 300 million won or $284,000 a year are required to pay the highest tax rate. However, the rival parties have agreed to lower the bar substantially to those making at least 150 million won or $142,000 a year. They also agreed to raise the minimum tax rate for conglomerates by 1 percentage point to 17%. Monday was the day that the leaders of the rival parties had agreed to pass the 2014 budget bill and a bill on reforming the scandal-ridden National Intelligence Service. However, they spent much of the day fighting over what the scope of the NIS reforms should be, stalling the processing of next year's budget. The biggest sticking point has to do with the addition of a clause in the bill on reforming the National Intelligence Service, which bans NIS agents from having full access to government offices and media outlets. The main opposition Democratic Party is asking that the ban be put into law to prohibit illegal information gathering activities. The ruling Saenuri Party is opposed to the idea, saying the ban will limit the ability of agents to gather intelligence. The $340 billion budget plan for 2014, drawn up by the government in September, has been collecting dust in the legislature for months, as the rival parties have been at odds over allegations that the spy agency tried to sway public opinion in favor of now President Park Geun-hye ahead of last year's presidential election. Kim Hyun-ji, Arirang News.
The finance ministers of Korea and China agreed to seek ways to deal with global uncertainties.
During the first of their high-level meetings since Presidents Park Geun-hye and Xi Jinping took office in Seoul, Korean Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok and his Chinese counterpart Shu Xiaoshi agreed to strengthen cooperation amid economic downturns in emerging countries and the tapering of quantitative easing by the United States. Seoul and Beijing also agreed to jointly respond to climate change and increase cooperation on green technology and industry, energy conservation, and environmental protection. The year 2013 was a prosperous one for the U.S. stock market as Wall Street kept setting records. The Korean bourse, on the other hand, not so much.
Our Yoo Ji-hae has more on how the Kospi performed this year.
The Korea Composite Stock Price Index ended at 2011.34 on the last trading day of this year, rising only 0.7% from last year. The lackluster performance is in stark contrast to a 56% jump of Japanese shares and a 26% Wall Street gain.
High production costs, the lack of an expansionary monetary policy, and delayed corporate restructuring all led to poor corporate results in Korea, which weighed heavily on the stock market.
The worst performers were shipping and construction companies. But it was none other than Samsung Electronics that really pushed down the Kospi, with its stock price falling by as much as 7.5% this year.
Samsung Electronics have been hitting record high operating profits, but with smartphones no longer seen as a commonplace product, investors have become wary about Samsung's future.
This year's star players was Naver, Korea's biggest portal with the most popular search engine. Buoyed by the success of its mobile messenger service called Line, the company saw its share value rise by over 100% this year. That pushed up Naver to the 6th most valuable company listed on the Seoul market from 14th at the beginning of the year. Foreigners emerged as the most influential investors this year, as many local individual investors fled the market, due partly to mounting household debt. With the disposable income to household debt ratio hovering at around a high of 140%, many Koreans simply could not afford to put their money in the stock market.
Experts say the improving global economy will give a boost to the country's manufacturing sector, causing the Kospi to rise about 7% on average next year. Yoo Ji-hae, Arirang News.
Before your day ends and another begins, get the latest news live from Seoul.
Residents whose features restrictions is on the rise. Closing ceremony.
Expert analysis from Asia's heartbeat.
The legislature, circumstances.
With a viewpoint only Korea's global network can provide.
The United States, the latest report.
Unrivaled access from a team always on standby.
Meeting came on maneuver, trying to cover up the South's true intentions. And here's Korea's follow-up reaction to Japanese Prime Minister Abe's controversial visit last week to the Yasukuni War Shrine. President Park Geun-hye expressed hope that there wouldn't be any more incidents in the new year that damage trust between countries and dig up wounds of the past. The remark was apparently directed at Japan, though she didn't mention it by name. Echoing her concerns, the National Assembly's Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee unanimously adopted a resolution on Monday that called on Tokyo to immediately stop anachronistic actions that aim to revive Japan's militarism. Abe visited the shrine, which honors convicted war criminals along with the country's war dead, on Thursday, drawing immediate criticism from Japan's regional neighbors. And with Korea and Japan relations plunging to new lows this year, strained by historical and territorial rows, could there be better days ahead for the two Asian powers in 2014? Kim Min-ji tells us more.
Relations between Seoul and Tokyo are at one of the worst levels of the post-war era, following Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's highly controversial visit last week to the Yasukuni War Shrine. And with several unfavorable events in store for next year, the icy relations are unlikely to thaw anytime soon. The first event is the Takashima Day, which takes place in Japan's Shimane Prefecture each year in February, claiming sovereignty over the Korea-controlled Dokdo Islets. This past February, the Abe administration sent government officials to the event for the first time, drawing sharp criticism from Korea. In March, Japan will announce the screening results of its history textbooks, while Tokyo is expected to unveil its diplomatic blue paper and defense white paper in April and July, respectively. As Japan continues to claim sovereignty over Dokdo, these events will almost certainly negatively affect the relations. It is also unclear whether Abe will make a second visit to the Yasukuni War Shrine during the April Spring Festival. Seoul's foreign ministry reacted strongly to Abe's visit last week, expressing its deep regret and anger. Another event which could ignite tensions is a ruling by Korea's Supreme Court ordering Japanese companies to compensate Korean victims of forced labor during Japan's colonial rule of Korea in the early 1900s. Making matters worse, if the case is taken to the International Court of Justice, it could expand into a diplomatic conflict. Moreover, Japan's continuous push for collective self-defense has also set the two countries against each other. The Korean government has been doing its best to convince its allies against supporting Japan's move to regain its right to collective self-defense, which would allow Tokyo to use force in the event an ally is attacked. Meanwhile, reports say that the Korean government will postpone all defense meetings and diplomatic exchanges with Japan for the time being. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Moving now to suicide bombing attacks in Russia. Two deadly explosions, one in a train station Sunday and the other on a trolley bus on Monday, have rocked a city located about 1,000 kilometers away from the site of the Sochi Winter Olympic Games. Kwon So-hwa has the latest.
Russia's city of Volgograd is in fear. Two suicide bombings in less than 24 hours have killed at least 31 people and injured more than 60. Security had been stepped up at train stations and airports around Russia after a suspected female suicide bomber attacked Volgograd's main train station on Sunday, killing 17 people. And then, with the shock of that bomb attack still fresh, a second deadly blast hit the city on Monday morning local time, killing at least 14 people and wounding scores more. Federal investigators are calling Monday's explosion on a trolley bus a terrorist act. They believe a male suicide bomber was responsible, and there are strong indications that the incident is linked to Sunday's bombing. Journalists in the area reported the roof of the trolley bus was blown off, with debris and bodies being scattered on the streets. As for Sunday's bombing, Russian authorities are still investigating, but they say the bomber detonated explosives in front of a metal detector just inside the main entrance of the station that was bustling with holiday travelers.
According to our information, a female suicide bomber approached the metal detector, saw a policeman there, got nervous and detonated the bomb. It could have been worse if the bomber passed through into the waiting hall, as the explosion was the equivalent of 10 kilograms of TNT.
While the bomber's identity has still to be confirmed, female suicide bombers known as Black Widows, the family members of dead insurgents, have carried out a number of attacks in nearby Muslim regions that stand opposed to the Russian government. Volgograd is located less than 1,000 kilometers northeast of Sochi, the host city for the Winter Olympics. The two consecutive attacks are raising security concerns, with the event kicking off in just 6 weeks. Kwon So-hwa, Arirang News.
2014 is on the horizon, and many Koreans are gearing up to ring in the new year at famous winter destinations on the Korean peninsula. Jeju Island is among the hottest spots, with thousands of tourists flocking to the resort island. Son Jung-in reports.
It's the last week of the year, and another wave of tourists has just arrived at Jeju International Airport. They're part of the 25,000 daily visitors Jeju Island has been receiving during the winter holiday season. Jeju has become a hot destination for those looking to celebrate the end of the year at one of Korea's leading vacation spots.
This week, many climbers, hikers, and leisure sports tourists are seeking out Mount Halasan's snowy landscapes, and many families are coming in this weekend as well.
However, if you're looking to book a last-minute trip to Jeju, you may want to plan carefully. Hotels, condominiums, and other rental accommodations here are reporting that up to 80% of their vacancies have already been booked. Rental car dealerships say bookings are limited, with over half of their vehicles signed out. But for those who are able to make the trek, the spectacular scenic views are sure to take your breath away. The annual festival, held on top of Jeju's famous Hongsan Ilchulbong, or Sunrise Peak, is expected to draw in large crowds on New Year's Eve.
We're extending the festival this year by 1 day for a 3-day, 2-night event. We've established a variety of programs, including traditional weddings for foreigners, trips to World Natural Heritage Sites, and others.
Whether you're visiting Jeju or in the capital city of Seoul, special events across the country will be welcoming the first sunrise of 2014 with warm wishes and united cheers. Son Jung-in, Arirang News.
The newest Texas Ranger Choo Shin-soo is back in Korea after a dizzying off-season.
And he held a press conference in Seoul upon his return. Stephen Che joins us with the highlights. Hello there.
Hey guys, the $130 million man arrived home after being introduced by the Rangers on Friday and talked to the press about the free agency frenzy of the past few months. The 31-year-old said that while the Rangers were the best fit, he wasn't the one who rejected the Yankees' $140 million offer. The outfielder also said that he would relish the chance to once again play for the national baseball team in the Asian Games if the Major League season didn't overlap. And finally, he laid out his new goal to reach the 300 home run, 300 steal milestone. It's a lofty goal considering he's a shade above 100 in both stats, but hope persists as he's proven to beat the odds in the past. Now let's talk about football. Bayer Leverkusen striker's Hong Heung-min has been named the best Asian player this year. ESPN FC's Asian football expert John Doerden placed the 22-year-old at the top of his list, citing his multiple game-changing performances this year, like that hat trick against Hamburg in November. Son is developing rapidly and continues to make defenses worry on both the club and national levels. Now on to more football news. National team manager Hong Myung-bo has laid out his plans for the upcoming World Cup in Brazil. He said the main goal is to beat their first opponents in the group stage, Russia, adding it was vital to making it to the knockout rounds. As for the issue of Park Ju-young, he would not give a definite answer as to whether he would put him on the squad. And moving on to golf, the European and Asian tours will join hands for the Eurasia Cup, a new Ryder Cup-style team match play tournament. Opening in late March, it'll go head-to-head against the similarly designed Royal Trophy tournament, which was won by Europe last week. And ending off with updates on former F1 champion Michael Schumacher. He's still in critical condition after his weekend skiing accident. Considering his state, doctors refuse to predict how Schumacher's condition might develop. The 7-time champion is still in a medically induced coma, and doctors are constantly monitoring his brain for any abnormalities. And that does it for me here in the Sports Center. This has been Stephen Che. Check back at midnight for the latest in the world of sports.
Well, it looks like we'll be ringing in the new year along with a familiar guest from China, fine dust.
For details, let's go over to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung, how bad is it?
Well, good evening, Sean and Ji-hae. Currently, Seoul is seeing 107 micrograms per cubic meter of fine dust, which is about 3 times the normal levels. Well, shifting gears for a bit, tomorrow you can check out the last sunset of the year at Namsan Tower in Seoul at 5:24 p.m. And those of you in Dokdo will be the first to see the country's New Year's sunrise at 7:26 a.m. Well, taking a look at the current conditions, the nation is under the influence of a high-pressure system from China, which is why we're seeing clear skies across the map. Now, keep in mind that there may be light passing showers late tomorrow night in the central regions, including Seoul, so please be sure to check future updates. Other than that, the rest of the nation should see partly cloudy skies. Taking a look at tomorrow's reading, Seoul reaches 7 degrees, meanwhile Daegu and Busan hit the low teens. As for other regions, Jeju peaks at 12 degrees, meanwhile Dokdo and Mount Kumgang top out at 8 and -2 degrees respectively. Well, that's all for now, and back to you guys.
And that's our broadcast on this Monday night. I'm Yoo Ji-hae in Seoul.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.